It's Marty, and welcome to part 23 of the C++ SFML game development series. In this video, we're going to be ditching the IDE. We're going to be just completely ditching code blocks. Now, what is an IDE, you might ask? IDE is an acronym for Integrated Development Environment. But you don't actually need an IDE. Anything you can do with an IDE, you can use without. Now, I know that there is a ton of awesome features and important tools on an IDE. But here's the thing. Anything you can use on an IDE, you can use without an IDE. You don't have to. This is 100% preference. If you're perfectly happy with the way we've been doing things before using code blocks, carry on doing it that way. But from this video on, I'm going to be using just Sublime Text to edit the code, and then the actual Windows command prompt to actually compile the C++ code. Let's get started by installing some development tools that we're going to need to write C++ code on Windows. Okay, here I am booted up on Linux, so you can just use whatever web browser you like. I like to use Firefox because it's free, fast, and secure. It might sound a little strange downloading programs for Windows on Linux, but there is a method to my madness. But my biggest fear with Windows 7 is that I'll connect it to the internet, and then one day I'll wake up and I'll be forced updating to Windows 10. Anyway, go with the downloads one. Alright, and you're going to want to click the link that says download the binary release. Be sure that it is the binary release. We can go with an exe. Codeblock 17.12 min.gw is important. We're not actually interested in the IDE, we're just interested in the GCC G++ compiler. Yes, I do realize that you could just download just the G++ compiler without code blocks. For simplicity wise, this way it's going to work fine as well. Save file already. While that's downloading, open a new tab, and we're going to also need to actually install something called a text editor. Now, I know that there is Notepad on Windows, but Notepad's kind of like eating some toast without any jam. There's just not a lot of features on Notepad. Plus, you go to undo your last couple actions, and you can only undo the last one. I prefer to use Sublime. This here is honestly preference. You could use Notepad++. There's tons of different options here. It doesn't honestly matter. Okay, we're going to go with that link there. That should give us what we want. Is that still taking forever? It is downloading, right? Yeah, we are downloading. Okay, Sublime Text. Okay, download. You want to click the download link. We're going to go with a Windows 64-bit. If you're not on 64-bit, you can go with the Windows non-64-bit. While that's downloading, we're going to need to install the SFML Sdk. You can just search SFML download. We're going to go with the download page. And the version of SFML does not honestly matter as long as if it's SFML 2 and up. And just click download the most recent release. And if you're on Windows, be sure that it does correspond with your corresponding IDE and a compiler. What this means is if you're on Microsoft's Visual Studio, be sure you go with the corresponding one right here. If you're on code blocks with the GCC compiler like we are, you're going to want to go with that one. Okay, we're back on Windows again. This is my USB here. By default, your download is going to be located in the downloads folder if you didn't know. Now, I would double click on install them, but it's fairly simple to actually install them, and my webcam recording software won't record when it asks me for administrative privileges. But it's fairly simple. You just basically say yes to everything in those setups. So just right click on the zip file you want to extract, and then just right click on it, extract all. We can extract it all to the desktop for now. Now depending on where you extracted your SFML library to, it should typically be located on the desktop if you're extracting it to the desktop. Double click on it and make sure you copy this folder right in here, Control-C. Now what I like to do is I like to store this right on my C drive. You can see I've already stored it there, so just drag and drop it right over to your C drive. Be sure that you're not in this folder here. Be sure you're one folder into it, like right here. Now I'm just going to clean up a second. I can delete those now that I've copied them to my C drive. Be sure you've copied them before you do delete them. If you do delete them, it's just going to go to the recycling bin for now. Okay, now you can just browse to any folder you like. I have a folder called C++. And here you can make a folder called dev, but this is my tutorial folder, so I just want to keep it clear in my head. So in your desired location, just hold in shift, right click, and you should see open command window here. I'll start by changing the color with color 0A. And now let's make some directories. mkdir, we're going to need one called source. We're going to need one called resources, so rs source. Then we are also going to store our resources in a folder called resources. What a resource would be is something like a text file, a font file. Data files such as that is what we would store in the resources folder. We're also going to need one called bin. This is where we're going to store our outputted application. And the last one is going to be include. This is where we'd store header files. Hit enter, it should make all those directories. Now if you type tree, it's a pretty cool command. You can actually see what you have in here, right? So we've got bin, include, resources, and sources. Let's browse into the bin folder with cd and then bin. And now we're gonna make two subdirectories here with mkdir. We're gonna call one debug, and let's also make another one called release. Now, why do we have two folders? It's because we want two different applications for the same game. And the debug mode, optimization and speed is not what matters. It's just making the code work. The C++ compiler is pretty cool because you can add additional flags to it, such as O-03 to fully optimize it for speed. Alright, and then we can just close out of command prompt there. Now, this step here is very important if you are on Windows. Be sure to follow along to the T. Head over to the Start button. You should see Control Panel. Open up Control Panel window. Now inside here, you're going to want to click on System and Security. Inside here, if you just click see the name of this computer, it's going to take us to the dialog that we're interested in. Now that you have the System tab open, you're going to want to go to Advanced System Settings. That should open up this dialog. Now you want to go under Environment Variables, click that button there. Scroll down right on this little dialog here until you find Path. Hit Edit. Now at the far, whoops, not new, Edit. You want to double click Path, will work fine as well. By default, it's going to look like this. You should see a whole lot of stuff. We're going to have to add something to this. To know what we want to add, you got to go to this PC or my PC on Windows 7. Go to your local disk C, your C drive. You're going to want to go underneath Program Files, x86, and you should see Code Blocks. Double click on there. Underneath MGW, go to Bin, click the little top bar thing, and that will tell you where this file is actually located. Select all that, Control C, go back to your advanced environment variables. Now at the very end of it, be sure it's at the very end of it, hold in Control and then type V to paste it all in there. And be sure you add a semicolon at the end of that. If you don't have that little semicolon, it's not going to work. Be sure you have a semicolon. Your path might look a little different than mine, but it probably should be about the same. Hit OK when you're done. Alright, that dialog when you're done, hit OK. And you can close out of pretty much everything. Now we can open up Sublime Text, just double click on it. And we're going to create ourselves a Windows batch script to actually compile our programs. We'll start with that @echo off to stop displaying all that useless junk on the screen. Let's set our color to something cool as well, 0A. Let's also set our mode as well. This is how big the screen is going to be, so that's mode. And you can go with 1000, is a fairly big screen. Hit enter. Go colon. This here is going to be like it's kind of like a function in C++, except it's not exactly a function. Let's call this one here menu because this is where everything's going to lead right back to. Hit enter. Let's print something nice to the screen with echo. We're going to give the user a couple instructions here. So we're going to start with just to compile, and we're going to compile this for debug mode. So compile debug, and let's not make it too long so it gets way off the screen here. So we're going to tell the user that one is to go to compile using debug mode, and then compile and run. Next, we're going to need a couple more here. So compile for, and in this case, this is going to be the release. To optimize a C++ program, all you have to do is just add like 3 flags, and that's it. Let's make it look nice. Be sure we've got a nice comma here, some square braces, and that's going to be 3 if we're going to compile for release. Then compile and run for release. So if we want to compile and then run it if we're in release mode, and that's going to be 4. And finally, if we just want to exit, well, that's going to be 5. There we go. A bit of a long message, but it's a message nonetheless. Hit enter. Now let's ask the user with some input. So go set, and then a /p. Make sure it is a p, and then you can call. We're going to call it a user because the variable is going to be a user. And now let's create some if statements with if. Open up 2 modulo signs or the percentage signs. If user space is equal to 1. Then go to, in this case, compile and debug for debug mode. And we can copy and paste that nice line of code. Hit enter. We're going to paste it 5 times because we have 5 different options here that we can use. If user equals 2, go to compile debug, or this is actually going to be compile run debug. User equals 3, we're going to go to compile for release. User equals 4, compile and then run for release. And then finally, if the user input is equal to 5, then just exit with exit. Now let's create the functions for compile debug. So we're going to call this compile debug. Now type G++ to compile as a C++ program. Add -C. We're going to want to compile everything. That's what the asterisk stands for. Everything inside of, or actually first we have to go inside of SRC, or source files. Everything that ends in a .cpp is going to be compiled. We're also going to add a couple little additional flags. The first one is going to be STD, which STD version we are using. What this means is which version of IOStream we're using, basically is what it means. We can roll with C++ 14. It's going to have all the features we're going to need for this tutorial. Let's add another one called W error, just to treat all warnings as errors, because we are going to be in debug mode. Let's add another one related to errors, W fatal, and then dash errors, just to make sure that all fatal errors get displayed to the screen or to the console. Now what does this dash I do? This is where we tell the compiler where SFML is. To find out where SFML is, you can go to your file explorer. Now, like I said before, I like to save my libraries in the C drive, so it's fairly easy to find them. Right here in my local disk C, browse inside there. Now, for this one, we're going to need to double click on include. And now, if you click up here once more, you can copy all that, Control C, and then you want to paste all of that right here into Sublime. This here is so that the C++ compiler can find where SFML actually is, so that when we say hashtag include SFML graphics, it knows exactly what we're talking about. That's all we're going to need for that line. Now, what this is actually going to do is it's going to output a .o file. This .o file is before it gets linked. So we have to type G++ again using the asterisk. Everything that ends in a .o file is going to get linked and compiled. Add a -o file to where is this going to output to, and we're going to output this to our bin/debug folder. And now add a -L, make sure it is a capital L, and then we can copy the directory right here, Control C, paste it right below it, and instead of include, in this case we're going to be dealing with lib for lib, a library. Now we can actually link all the components of SFML. So we'd add a -L, SFML-graphics is the first one. The order of it is important, so don't change up the order here. Next is L SFML-window, so we can actually use a window. L SFML and this one is called system. Now these three here are mandatory. You will not be able to use SFML without these three here linked. L SFML, and then this one is audio, so that we can actually play sound files. Because we're working on a 2D platform, we're going to need sound files. The last one is L SFML-network. This would be in case we had a multiplayer function or something like that. Something similar to that in our game. And hold on a second, before we compile it, let's clear the screen too. So that this way, you're going to click 1, it's going to clear the screen, and then it's going to say, ooh, we should also print a nice message while we're at it. So first we're going to clear the screen with CLS, enter, then we're going to echo something nice to the screen, like echo to make it look like we're compiling for debug, and then ... to make it sound like we're actually working here. And let's go echo and then dot to add a new line just to make it look nice and everything. Let's also wait for some user input after this happens. Add an angular bracket and then NUL to say don't display pause to the screen, so it doesn't say press enter to continue. Or actually, instead of clearing the screen right here, it would be, we'd save ourselves some lines of code if we cleared it at the beginning of menu. That makes a lot more sense. Just clear it right there, way simpler. And then after we ask for some user input again, then we're going to go to just says go to another section in the code, and then menu. Here, line 22, we want to add another /, because this here specifies where it is. It's in the bin folder inside the debug folder. And we're going to call it game.exe to say that's an executable for Windows. Looks all good to me. Now we can copy that, Control C, hit enter. We're going to paste this a couple times, paste. Probably about 4 times is good. There we go. Let's rename the second one what it should be, which is compile run debug. The only difference is that instead of just going to the main function here, we're actually going to run our game. To do that, open up some double quotes. Now inside here, we're going to run bin/debug/ and then game.exe. And now on the line below it, instead of compile debug, compile release. Now for compile and release, this is where we can actually add some pretty cool flags to the compiler. Let's start with an optimization flag, which is O3, to fully optimize it for speed and performance. Another flag we can pass to the compiler is -S to strip all debugging symbols to downsize the file size. And the last one we're going to add is -F, hence, if I hope I'm spelling this right, I'm not the best speller in the world, to be honest. Expensive-optimizations. The other thing that we want to change here is where this is going to output to. Instead of outputting it to the debug file, we're going to output it to the release file because it's the actual release file. Alright, so we can just copy compile for release, Control C, and then we can replace compile for debug. Then instead of compile release, compile and run for release. The only difference here is that we're actually going to run it. So to run it, we're going to go dot forward slash is on Linux, 2 quotations to actually run it on Windows. / release / and then it's going to be game.exe. So we're actually ready to save it almost. We just want to do one thing. This is honestly preference. Let's create another folder inside C++ in the event that we'd have more than one C++ game. So new folder, and we're going to call this one here our 2D platformer. And now let's just move all of our nice little folders into 2D platformer. Now to save a file in Sublime Text, just go Control, Shift, and then S to save it as something. Let's go to the desktop. And you can really save this wherever you want. I've just got mine as tutorials, C++, 2D platformer. Right there is where we want to save it. Typically, it's typical to call this build, but you can name it whatever you want, but the .bat, the extension is what matters. Make sure it's all files. Save. Yeah, I did make it too big. Let's make it a little bit smaller. Let's just take out the line mode 1000 because we don't need it quite that big. That's Control S to save it again. Let's try that once more. Double click on it. There, that's a reasonable size. So let's compile it for debug 1. Let's see what happens. Error. Invalid argument, there are no input files. That's right. Now what we can do is hopefully you haven't deleted your other C++ code blocks project because we're still going to need it a little longer. Go to Windows Explorer again. The old project should look like this. You're going to want to copy the main.cpp file, Control C. We're going to go inside into source and paste it right in there. We're also going to need data and assets. So Control C, data. Paste that right into resources. And let's also copy our assets, Control C, and paste them right into our data. Let's also copy our assets folder, Control C, and paste it right in there into our new resources folder because they are resources. Resources, assets means the same thing. Actually, I'm going to change up the way the directory is just a little bit. This is preference really. So inside assets, let's just delete the whole assets folder. We've already got a folder called resources, so there's no need to have another folder called assets. So just go inside assets here and then copy the fonts and the images straight in here. It's going to be fairly simple from there to work. Okay, and then this way all we have to do is copy the resources folder into bin and then paste it in corresponding for debug and release. And then it's just one copy and paste if we update something inside our actual project file right here. So now if we open up the build batch file again, we're probably going to get an error. I can pretty much guarantee it. If we go with 1 to compile debug, compiling for debug, it's going to say no errors. But if we compile and run for debug, compiling for debug, and game.exe system error, the program cannot start because we need a DLL, a dynamic library. So open up your file explorer again, and now let's just open up a new one with right clicking on Windows Explorer. Let's go over to our C drive, so that's local disk C. Right inside in SFML, we're going to go inside bin, and we want to copy everything inside here. So Control C, and then go over to our project directory where bin, and then debug. We're going to paste it in here for debug. Make sure you copy and paste it into release and into debug as well. Make sure it's inside both. Now if we actually go to run it again, go to our Windows batch script again. We can just close out of that Explorer. I'm getting lost here. Where am I? Now we can go inside here. Now if we run the Windows batch file once more with 2 to compile and run debug, it should compile and run all good. And we have we've got a couple problems here. We're not able to open up our images, our fonts, that's because again, we changed up our directory slightly. And you can just close out Sublime. We're going to be opening Sublime right back up a second. Go into source, you right click on main.cpp, hit open with Sublime text. Now we need to change a couple things. So let's scroll down into our main function. So what we need to do here in our main function is we need to replace this data with resources, which is fairly simple to do. Go Control H to replace something. Find data, replace with. Our data might mean a couple things here, so we're going to take it one at a time. So replace, right, replace, carry on. That was actually only one. Only data was right there. Fine, just take out data. We're going to be looking for assets. So everything that says assets, let's replace that with resources. Replace, 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 replace. Good. If we go back to our batch file, our little command prompt open here, hit enter. To compile and run for debug, it should work 100%. There we go. So we got it working 100% with no IDE whatsoever involved. Hold on a second. Let's go back to the build Windows batch script. Right click on it, open with Sublime text. So compile debug is declared twice. No reason to do that. We can take that out. That's just way extra lines for no reason. Compile run debug. Okay, that works, except the text is going to be the same. So it's everything's fine. It's just the text is the same. Compiling and running for debug, and then for compile for release instead of debug release, just to let the user know that it's actually compiling for release. Otherwise, it looks like it's compiling for debug, even though it's not. And then instead of compiling for debug, we're gonna go compiling and running for release. Alright, and that looks all good to me. Control save, and now it should work 100%. And now we can run our batch file once more, and it should work on 100%. 1, to compile debug, compiling for debug, perfect, enter. 2, compile and run, compiling and running for debug, right on schedule, compiling and running, and enter. 3, to compile for release, compiling for release, righto, enter. And 4, to compile and run for release, it should compile and then run. In the next video, we're going to be using multiple platforms in our actual game, so we're going to get back to writing code in the game. We're also going to take a look at a couple optimization concepts for the game. So thank you for watching and subscribing. Every subscriber does help us out. If you have a question, leave it down below, and I'll see you next video.